answering that, well, you're not asking this, but the problem with answering that in terms of how would I get into comics or would I get into animation or something like that now, I have no idea because I came out in the 70s as a kid, and the 80s was when I was in college wasting my parents' money on an animation film degree, which I didn't need. I just decided I like comics more than film because in comics you can do it all by yourself, and in film you have to work with idiots. I work with a lot of idiots in comics too. You get to go home, you don't have to listen to them, they don't have to hold the camera or anything like that. But I got into comics by just making comics. My influences as a kid were Marvel comics, specifically Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, John and Sal Buscema. Kirby pretty much with Stan Lee, editorial guidance and ripping them off. Kirby and Ditko pretty much created everything that you know for the Marvel Universe. That they've made toys of and whatnot. Back then they used to reprint the old comics at the same time as putting out the new ones. So you could, for a quarter, for $4 for $1, go to your grocery store. You didn't have to find a comic shop and go online. The comics were literally everywhere. And for $1, you could get what was coming out in 1975 and what had come out in 1965, 1967. Very easy to collect, not a lot of continuity. I love those comics. I would copy the characters, did very bad drawings of them. But I also like newspaper comics, which were very strong at the time. At this point, they're an online phenomena only, and not a lot of new strips get launched anymore. I mean, newspaper comics don't really have the cachet they had when I was a kid. I love Peanuts. I like humor strips. I like Mad Magazine. They used to reprint Mad comics from the 50s and the 70s super editions, so I'd go to camp with one of them. And that's how I got into Harvey Kurtzman, Will Elder, Wally Wood, amazing artists who are still reprinted to this day in reprints of Mad, Tales from the Crypt. Jack Davis was in there. Don Martin was a cartoonist in the 70s that I like. Al Jaffe, who passed away a couple years ago. I think he made it to 100. He did the Mad Foldins. Antonio Prohayas, who did Spy vs. Spy. This is all the stuff that I grew up on as a kid, and it was much more centered. I mean, you could literally get all the comics that came out. You could get the fan magazines, the monster magazines. There was, because it was New York, you had a lot of syndicated television, so I liked animation. For a while, that's something I wanted to do. But you had, Warner Brothers, Max Fleischer, Disney, everything was, and some early anime. UHF channels carried Gigantor, Kimber the White Lion, which is Tezuka, Astro Boy, Speed Racer, all that stuff. All that's what I was into. I mean, I was a total nerd. If you've read Eltingville, I didn't have to look a lot of that stuff up. I mean, people ask me about the trivia off, did you know all that? And I'm like, no, but what I did know, I knew how to look up really quick. I mean, I was a total nerd. But it was a good time to be a nerd in a lot of ways because you could be on top. And also, I went to conventions when I was like 13 by myself. Back before, I guess my parents would get arrested for letting me get on the subway and go to a convention with a lot of middle-aged men in weird shirts, arguing with dealers who were selling pornography behind the counter. But yeah, I used to walk around. I was like the only 13-year-old kid unattended, totally into it. Star Trek conventions, creation, comic books. So I absorbed everything. I didn't like DC comics, but I mean, I was aware of them. And I was also influenced by Harvey and Archie because my dad, who sucked, would see us on Sundays, which was dreadful, but he would take us to the Te Amo tobacco and magazine shop on Kings Highway every Sunday night. It was easy to spend money on us than to talk to my sister and I. So he bought me every Marvel. I got every Marvel that I picked up off the rack, and she got every Archie and Harvey. So I loved comics, so when I was done with my Marvel, I'd read the Archies and Harveys. Still wouldn't read DC, though, because I thought they were terrible. I later ended up working at the comic store that Ronnie Hill is co-owner of now. That's Ronnie, the Wu-Tang boy. Ask him to freestyle. He's amazing. Oh my God, what flow this man has. Right?
A little.
Like Rakim.
A little.
What?
A little bit of flow.
Embarrassing, Ronnie? I hope
No.
so.
KRS-One once called my house.
What do you do? Call the police? That's the sound of the police.
Yes.
Why did he come? You'll have to tell me this later.
I'll tell you
You have
later.
to tell all of us. This is much more interesting than stupid comic.
My friend Alex was an
I didn't want to hear it now.
Oh, you said tell all of us. You said tell all of us.
I said later on. They can go to the store and get this crap. This is my hour, 45 minutes.
Fine.
I'm not making any sense. Oh, shut up. Anyway, I absorbed everything. I think most of the cartoonists that I grew up with. I'm 60. I just turned 60. But people like Kyle Baker, Steve Stefano, the people that I hung out with when I met people in the industry. New York was the place to be back then. Also, this is another difference. You don't have to be in New York to get into comics, but you had to in the 80s. Very few people were able to mail their work in or come in from Connecticut or whatever, because everybody was working at home. You really weren't working in bullpens at DC and Marvel except to do corrections and stuff. But everything was in New York. Archie, Marvel, DC. Distributors were in New York. Good stores were in New York. Conventions were in New York. The magazines that were running comics were in New York. The New Yorker. Magazines are pretty dead right now, but I got in on the end tip of that stuff. So later on, all my influences that I had, I was able to use to do comics and illustration for Nickelodeon magazine, for Disney Adventures, and I ended up working for Mad for 10 years, which was a pretty geek moment for me because, I grew up on that stuff. I love Mad magazine. I was very sorry to see it have to move to LA and get canceled practically. It only comes out as mostly a reprint now. It's a zombie publication. But being able to draw for Mad was, and I got to write a couple of things, but they mostly hated my writing. So yeah, those were my influences. Animation, comics, plus all the monster movies, wrestling. All the junk. If you've read my comics, at least not Beasts of Burden, because the animals don't know about power bombs and swinging neck breakers and monster movies. Which is one fun thing about writing Beasts of Burden is that they don't know anything actually. They can't open doors. They don't go on computers. So it sucks. They're stupid characters. When they have to solve a mystery, it's very un-Scooby-Doo like. They don't drive, they don't eat snacks, they don't talk to people. Anyway, that's off topic. But my influences, Tintin was reprinted as a kid when I was a kid. There was a magazine called Children's Digest that ran comics like Peanuts, but they also ran translations of Hergé's Tintin, which ended up on HBO years later, and it was a failed Steven Spielberg film. But it's one of the biggest comics in Europe. It's a Belgian comic. This weird little guy with a funny haircut and his dog, and if you've ever seen that. But I was influenced by whatever was out there at the time. Then I ended up working at the Fantastic Store, which was on the corner where the Lane Theater was, on New Dorp Lane. And the owner, Jim Hanley, it was a full-line comic store. It was not a store run by somebody who basically had to be a fan of every book he sold, which meant that he almost ordered too much stuff. EC comics were in there, European comics, independent comics, zines, and mainstream stuff. But he ordered newspaper strips. That's how I got into old newspaper strips, was through Jim. And I was reading the Comics Journal, and that got me into, in college I was reading that, and that opened me up to a lot of stuff. So when I was older, things like Love and Rockets, Dan Clowes, then I got into a lot of classic strip stuff. You can find all this stuff online. Right now, everything's available, but also everything's available makes it harder to be influenced by everything. There's so much out there. I love manga. I've been reading manga since the 80s. I think I Saw It was the first thing that I picked up when Eclipse was bringing stuff over and some education services were bringing manga over. And that's pretty much most of the stuff I read now. My influences now are broader, but as far as comics go, I'm really into horror manga and slice of life manga and stuff like that, Suge and stuff like that. But Yotsuba, I go to the library because who the hell can afford 76 volumes of Bleach? I don't know how kids do it, but So yeah, that's a long answer. I like a lot of shit, and I was influenced by it.
I was kind of going to ask you about that because you've seen both sides where you had to go seek new books or influences, and now we are bombarded at our fingertips.
Can't keep in touch. When the awards programs come around every year in comics now, up until about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you would get an Eisner ballot for favorite stuff, blah blah, and you knew what was on the ballot. You'd read most of it, or you were aware of it, and you could track it down. I don't know how anybody. I vote for maybe 3 categories now. I cannot follow this, and it's a good thing, it's an explosion of amazing work. You know, there's so many art styles. I mean, there's beautiful work being done everywhere. I mean, you see beautiful Argentinian comics, reprinting Argentinian comics, Breccia and people like that, Mexican comics, and all sorts of bizarre stuff coming out. Very cult Japanese comics are coming out through the Smudge line, which is all horror stuff that is rare and obscure even in Japan. But knowing what's going on in comics, it's impossible. A publisher can't know it anymore. Distributors don't know it anymore. So it's very fragmented, and so people will write me questions about Eltingville now, and they're young, like the people I'm seeing here, and I know sometimes what they're talking about. Plenty of times I have absolutely, like now I know what OCs are. I mean, I knew what shipping was, because I've been shipping myself with Tony Storm for the last year, and she won't call me back. But I think I have this piece of paper from the government that I'm not supposed to go within 400 feet of her. But she kicked my ass, right? So what's the problem, right? I just want to talk to her. Thank you. So it's, the influences, but what's interesting about that is to see people who are not, about 25 years ago or so, you started to see people who you would come up to your table and you'd ask them what they're into, they'd show you your art, and they had no interest in Marvel or DC. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Marvel and DC, I've done work for both companies. And in a perfect world, I'd love to do a Demon series for DC, the Metal Man series that me and Michael Allred was supposed to do for them that got canceled. And I love doing stuff for Marvel, but you know, it's not as freewheeling as it used to be. You literally could go up to Marvel and DC and talk to somebody up there if you had the nerve. I didn't, but I had somebody who took me up there. And you could say, we'd like to do, you know, are you looking for artists? And they'd say, go sit on the couch, and you'd sit on the couch, and we got a meeting with Archie Goodwin, who's an amazing writer and editor, and he shot us down, but it was one of the most instructive criticisms I ever had. It's really hard to have that one-on-one these days, because you go to a convention, you used to be able to go to a convention, and except for like Steve Lieber, if anybody knows Steve Lieber's work, he's super open and he loves to critique people's stuff and blah, 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 but he's also good at it. I don't know shit about art, you know what I mean? I know about writing more than art, but I mean, cartooning is a synthesis of both, and I know how to make a comic book. It's hard for me to tell you how I made it, because I don't really have the fundamentals. I did not go to art school. I've taken one anatomy class and one life drawing class, and it shows. That's why all my characters look insane all the time. But you know, I also learned after a while that it doesn't matter. I mean, if you look at Marvel and DC your whole life, you'll think that's the only way there is to make comics. That's a problem I had growing up. I wanted to be a Marvel artist. I wanted to draw Spider-Man by the time I was 30. And I ended up doing Bill and Ted's Excellent Comic for 12 issues when I was 23. I don't know how old I was, it's math. And that was very unexpected. I mean, it was a really weird, long story about how I ended up in comics. So I don't want to spend too long on that, because nobody can duplicate that now. And that's not because I'm special. It's because it was a different time that you can't recreate. I literally got some of my work because I worked at Jim Haley's Universe, and I was at San Diego Comic-Con I had no work in the industry. My book was canceled in 87. I did my first San Diego Con. I was able to wrangle a hotel room with Brian and Tony, a friend of mine knows what I'm talking about. And and my parents gave me money for the plane ride, and it was a much smaller convention. And I got very, very drunk at that show, and I cracked a couple of jokes that went over with some people, and I ended up at a party, the after party, which was very small in a hotel room, because now the after party is, I don't know if you've read them, you can read online easily. Dark Horse goes off here, Marvel has their own party, nobody can get into anything, and when I went to my first party, it was people from Marvel, DC, Kamiko, retailers, graffiti, Bob from Graffiti, and a bunch of people that ended up in the industry. But I mean, you had Bob Burden reading his fan mail from Flaming Carrot from a lunatic in Canada who wanted to kill him. Not kidding, it was a famous line, he would read it every year. And I had people who ended up, and you know, it was just, you know, beer was in the bathtub. It was just a regular hangout party. And I ended up meeting all these people. And years later, two of them hired me. I did a Predator series for Dark Horse. I did Bill and Ted because I met Fabian Nicieza, the co-creator of Deadpool. He was in marketing, and Jim Hanley flew a bunch of us out to San Diego for the retailers. What do they call it? Retailers
Expo.
Expo. You know, where I was there as a retailer, and I got a grandfathered table in Artist Alley. We had dinner with Marvel's marketing team, and that was Fabian Nicieza, and I forget who else. And I got really drunk. This was '88. And I know I was doing something dumb, some stunt with lychee nuts. That's all I remember from it. But basically, Fabian got into editing, and he remembered, as he put it, he said, the loud guy who liked bands nobody had ever heard of. And he said, would you like to do Bill and Ted, because it's gonna die in 12 issues and we don't really have anybody to do it. And that's how I got that. I got Predator and that from going to conventions and being drunk enough to be social, because normally I was scared of everyone. Like, I ran away from Jack Kirby. I ran away from Jaime Hernandez. I was terrified to meet people. When I met Sergio Aragonés, and he's one of the nicest guys in comics, Sergio, I should have mentioned him with Mad Magazine, is one of my favorites. And anyway, I don't know if I answered that question, but, because I forgot it all. That's why my comics take a long time to read, because I write like I talk, and that's why my hand's fucked up, because I letter all that stuff. Next question.
Your work often features dark humor and sharp satire.
You know a lot about me, don't you? You got this all down.
How do you develop your distinctive voice as a creator, and how has it evolved over time?
It's a good question, but it's another long one that, I try to tell people. It's like, I can't tell you how to draw, and I could tell you I could give you tips on writing. Drawing, I can only give you the most fundamental stuff, vary your ink lines, have a thicker line in the front, have a thinner line in the background so that things contrast. Don't watch your tangents. They don't have blackboards anymore. I can show you what a tangent is, but
There's a marker?
oh, look at that. Oh, so I got my sense of humor. I got my sense of humor in Brooklyn. I bought it. No, tangents. Just so since I mentioned it, tangents is if you have, let's say you have a figure here and there's a desk behind them. If you put that desk line, this is a very simple one, with that line, it's gonna look really creepy. People's eyes are gonna go right towards that. That's a tangent. But it also works when let's say you have a house, and then you have a car, but you drew the car to be, this is the worst art of my fucking life. This is sub-Minecraft, this is bullshit. If you put the lines in a certain way, the eye will go towards it. And it's actually something that a lot of people do when they start out. Line weights is line weights is literally just, let's draw a really shitty Josh here. I mean, he's always shitty. Josh is based on somebody who lived in this neighborhood, in fact. But he's not, none of the characters I based these guys on are really like them. We were not super nerds that fought that way. We fought about other dumb shit. When we got into serious arguments, only one D&D fight. So a line weight is like, this marker sucks, absolutely sucks. And I'm sure some teacher had to use his own money, because the world sucks, to buy this shitty marker, which is probably way too much. So line weights is that use a thicker line on your foreground characters, and in your backgrounds, if you're drawing buildings and whatnot, you want to use a thinner line. Oh, that was going to be a building, but it turned out to be a garden milk. Yay! Looks like an ugly doll. Garden milk. Now I'm just drawing bullshit now.
Oh, Josh has clear skin.
Yeah, hold on, we'll take care of that.
You did him too nicely, there you go.
He's 5. He's 5 in this one, but yeah, that's line weight. Also,
super shitty yet.
No, it's just his parents. Also, varying your line weights. I mean, this is hard to see here, but let's say that's an ink line magnified. It's not using the same, taking out a micron, like a number 5 micron or something, and doing the same damn line for everything. For your folds, which I suck at, but let's pretend I know what I'm doing. But if you're as a hand, but I mean, if you're doing folds and everything like that, you shouldn't have the same damn single ink line, even though a lot of Marvel and DC guys do that now. They draw beautifully, but they let the colorists do all the texture and all the weight, the line weights. If you look at older comics, you look at the inking on them, Mike Royer or John Severin or or anything. I mean, styles come and go, that's another thing, you know, if you aim your art at one particular style, if you say, all I wanna do is Batman, man, this might be the most important thing I can tell you. Think of it as and I know I'm off topic, but some of this will get to the voice. Think of it as a bullseye, right? You wanna be a commercial artist, because that's what we all are. You know, even if we're doing art comics, you're still trying to sell the stuff so you can keep going with it. But you think of this as a dartboard, right? And you wanna do Batman only, which there are, you know, I gotta do Transformers. Okay, whatever, you were raised right. But that's your aim. To get to do Batman for DC, how many people get to do that in a year? How many people get to do that in a decade, if you think about it? And some people own the books. So you're aiming to hit that bullseye because that's all you know. You're drawing like Jim Lee, or you're drawing like whoever the hell is doing Batman these days. If you don't get that job, what are you gonna do? If you don't get on a boss's book, a company book, you're not gonna do anything. So if, back in the day, if you could do pay stuff, if you could do graphics, blah, 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 it keeps you in the business the same way that working in a guitar store, if you're a musician, you know what I mean? You learn, you know, you're sort of in the business. When I'm working in the comic store, when I was working in a comic store, I made contacts through the store. I learned more about comics. You know, things happen when other nerds show up, and some of them might have somebody who needs an artist. So in my career, the voice is the schmucky things that I'm saying here is the schmucky voice I use in all of my comics. I mean, it's just natural for some people. Growing up, I wanted to be a stand-up comic, right? But I didn't have balls to do it. I just don't like being in front of, you know, I talk a lot and I get nervous, blah, blah, blah. So my comics are where, you know, I call it sit-down comedy, or, you know, sketched comedy, because I would love to have done sketches and improv and stuff like that. But I do them on the page, because that way nobody has to deal with me. I don't have to have my looks or my voice or anything, you know. Same thing with animation. That's why I like being behind the scenes, controlling the whole thing, the whole world. But I've done animation work, I've written for animation, I've designed for animation, I've done illustrations for magazines, I've done book covers, I've done book interiors, I've done Bibles for TV shows that have never been made, except for the Eltingville pilot. But I adapted Commandy, my wife and I adapted Jack Kirby's Commandy from Warner Brothers. We did a Bruce Timm thing, we did Andy Watson's Skeleton Key. And I've done t-shirts, I've done CD covers, all for small bands that have too many horn players, and a couple punk bands that nobody's ever heard of. That variety kept me going, you know, and I was doing shit for fanzines, I was doing my own comedy books. I never meant to do Milk and Cheese. It was, Milk and Cheese is a distillation of my voice. And the thing is, if you think about some of the more successful cartoonists, they tend to write and draw their own stuff. I mean, there's way more richer and more well-known in convention circles, comic book circles. But if you think of people like Matt Groening, Raina Telgemeier, David Mazzucchelli, Frank Miller, the Hernandez brothers, Dan Clowes, people like that, Sergio Aragones, all the people at Mad who can do, you know, they do the whole package. They write, draw, letter, nobody has to, they can just go off and make comics. If bombs drop, we can still make comics. Not that anybody will buy them, but they don't buy them most of the time anyway before the bombs drop, so who the fuck cares? But you get to do the more things you can do, the more work you can get, or the more work you can do for yourself. Also, the more of your work you will own, which is very, very important. The Eltingville pilot got made because I owned it, and I was able to go talk directly to the Adult Swim because they really wanted Milk and Cheese. But they wanted to own it, and I didn't want to sell Milk and Cheese because I like them because they're a lot cuter than this son of a bitch. And I like to own my stuff. I don't like, you know, most cartoonists still, you know, you own your stuff, and then I never got into comics to make movies and make TV. I never knew I was going to get into animation, even though I studied it at SVA before I got kicked out, and at NYU, which I did not get kicked out of, I just want to say for the record. I did not get kicked out of New York High School either, although I was often in trouble for doing things that I'd rather talk about than comics, to be honest, because it was a lot of fun, especially the snowball fight, where I opened up all the windows and got the entire second floor to be fighting with everybody out in front of the school. And when the teacher came in, the room was filled with snow, and class got I had a bunch of fights there too. They were pretty good because I got the shit kicked out of me every single time. But, anyway.
Can I?
Yeah, you better interject, because I'm not gonna answer a question. This is how but the voice is basically, I always tell people the voice is more important than your art in some ways. Because I'm not a great artist. I cannot knock out beautiful anatomy. I'm not a great draftsman, I'm not a great technical artist, but you look at somebody like Art Spiegelman, who says, yeah, I'm really not a great artist, but he puts it together in such a way that, he ends up, he's got a Pulitzer Prize, and he doesn't have to work most of the time, which is great. And he has an apartment in Manhattan, which is enviable. But if the voice is if you like a director, if you like John Carpenter's films, or Kubrick's films, or Jean Renoir, or whatever, there is a voice throughout those films that there isn't when you go to see your average movie. It's not necessarily even an auteur thing, it's just the elements, the style that you bring to your films, the way you write your scripts. Voice isn't just my talking and making jokes, it's the timbre you bring to something. Bands, a lot of my favorite bands don't play music as well as any classical musician or whatnot, but I would rather listen to, bands that have a voice, that just stand out from the pack because of what they're writing about, the way they play, the energy. They can't replace you as a voice. They will always replace you as a Batman artist, even if you're the best Batman artist ever. You will always be replaced because your style's gonna go out. But if you have your own voice, you leave Batman and you go off and you do Sin City, let's say. Or you leave Green Lantern and you can do Watchmen. And then do your own books or whatever the hell. But your voice is important because you can always be replaced as an artist and as a writer. But as a cartoonist, as a full creator with a voice, it's not replicable. You'll go off and do your own thing, which is why I tend to find this is happening more and more. It always used to be people followed characters growing up. Everybody was a Batman fan or a Spider-Man fan. They were not a Gil Kane fan necessarily. They didn't follow Gil Kane off of Spider-Man and whatever the hell Gil Kane was doing to pay his alimony and stealing art and all that shit. But he's dead, I can say that now. It's an open secret. But the thing is, now people are following artists. They follow Brian Lee O'Malley. They don't just hope Brian Lee O'Malley gets on X-Men, which would do very well, but you know what I'm saying. I mean, you will always be replaced on things that you don't own. And voice is about owning all the work you do.
Can you avoid?
I don't think any of this makes any actual sense, but it sounds pretty good when it comes out of it. I don't have to hear it, so I hope it works.
I think you kind of touched it. Maybe not you, can an artist avoid not putting some of themselves in their work?
No, even if you're hacking something because your line is it's like your signature. Even if you ape somebody else's style, there's going to be telltale signs in your art and in your writing because you can't self-police, you can't self-edit, you can't remove yourself from the equation. But the thing is, that's why a lot of popular mainstream work is done by people who have a separate voice than the pack. Something like Batman Year One or Daredevil Born Again is very different because of the two voices, because of Mazzucchelli and Miller, than your average run of Batman or X-Men or things like that. That's changing a lot now because the whole industry has grown up. Everybody's way more self-aware of things now. So a lot of people are bringing their own peculiarities, their own style, their own tics to mainstream comics. And writers have become more important when it used to be artists were more important. It really seems like people follow writers. Artists will follow artists, but when I was a kid, you were always buying stuff. George Perez, John Byrne. Very few people were ever going, yeah, I'm following Mark Wolfman or Len Wein or Roy Thomas or any of those writers. You generally like the art, but now everything seems to be written, driven by writers, which is, made a very large impact on the industry, where writers are kind of more important than artists. And when I say more important, I mean commercially. I don't mean because artists also, and artists do their own writing, which is a whole, we could do 45 minutes on the invisible art of writing when you're drawing a comic book. because you're making decisions that are not in the script. Even if you're following the script, your voice and everything will go into those pages, which is why I think a lot of people who are Marvel style artists should get story credit, because they're actually kind of bored and creating things. If you write page 3 fight scene, and you get paid as the writer, the artist has to break all that down and actually choreograph it. I personally think the artist is a co-writer at that point. But again, I'm off subject. But, are we gonna have time for questions from the audience if anybody has one?
If you guys want to ask questions? Sure.
Okay, that was fast. You have another one? Does anybody have one? Oh, yes, sir.
Regarding like comics and all that, like, what was like one of the most like career-defining moments for you in the industry, like for your life? What was like one moment where like you were like working in like going like through publishers or all that that really defined like who you were in like this world?
Might be when I spit beer off the second floor hotel room onto the Dark Horse party.
I was there for that.
In that was 80. Yes, it was 88.
In '88.
And they got. I almost had to sign a behavior clause in '91 when I did my first work for Dark Horse. Diana Schutz tells me, we might be sending you. But when they found out who I spit the beer on, they all thought it was funny. So now it's a big joke. Mike Richardson's always like, ha ha ha, I won't name who I spit the beer on. A former art director and a family member of a famous artist. But
Do you
anyway.
recommend that?
Yes. 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 No, I'd say that because also beer influences, like beer became an influence, definitely. I mean, I created Milk and Cheese when I was drunk at a Mexican restaurant after a show at CBGB's, and I drew Milk and Cheese, and my friend Brian, he liked it, he took the napkin. So I kept drawing them, and then one day I was at a convention, and I met Steve Niles, who did 30 Days a Night, but he was a drummer in the band Gray Matter at Discord Records, and Kurt Sayanga, his partner on a zine called Greed, a magazine called Greed, which was a comics and band thing, and Kurt was art director on Fugazi albums and things like that at Discord. And they said, if you ever draw a comic, because I was just drawing Milk and Cheese on people's backing boards at the '88 convention, in fact, because the kids didn't know who I was. I didn't have a run on a book that they liked, or a character. So I would just draw these stupid Milk and Cheese guys, telling them to burn their comics, telling them that their parents were all wrong, telling them that they were, mistakes. I mean, dumb crap. So, I think we all had funny band shirts on, so we gravitated towards one another, and we got to talking. And I did the first Milk and Cheese strip because I got whacked and I met people. But, most of my successes were one-shots. Milk and Cheese was never supposed to be a comic. Beast of Burden was 1 8-pager. Eltonville was supposed to be 6 pages, 5 pages? It's just supposed to be a pipe bomb to some people that I hated in the industry and fans. And because my friend got hate mail, who was writing Justice League at the time, and he got hate mail and death threats from a bunch of morons because he killed a secondary or tertiary character that of course was going to come. But you don't kill anybody. Nobody dies in comics except the cartoonists. Nobody dies except the creators and the fans. Everything else is going to be around forever, Bollywood dies, Superman never will die, okay? So they sent him a hate mail, and he got on the phone. He says, he couldn't believe it. He was so upset, and I was pissed off, and I had 10 pages to fill for Instant Piano #1, and I made a 5-page hate letter to fans, to toxic fans, although we didn't call them that at the time. I think we just called them assholes. That's what we called them, assholes. Yeah. What the hell was the question? I forgot. Oh, the defining moment, really? I don't know, because that's a weird one. The first time I won an Eisner Award was really wild because I never went to the awards in San Diego because I was lost. And I was like, why should I go when I can have fun with my friends in a restaurant somewhere? But they tipped me off that I might be winning it. My friend Brian, he said, they did that to so-and-so when he won. They specifically asked. So I showed, now I was not an alcoholic, but at conventions, I don't have to drive, I don't have to be anywhere. I was in San Diego for the second time in my life. I never had gone anywhere. So yeah, I'm drinking Coronas all night. It's free. I don't give a shit. I go to my hotel room, and we'd stay up to what? 5 in the morning,
It was
6
just-
in the morning. That's the convention I met Mark Hamill. And
Right, he walked into our
Mark
room.
Hamill was baked in our hotel room. I'll try, but winning that Eisner was fascinating because it was great to have a crowd of people clapping for me. I think they clapped more when I got off. They were happy to get rid of me. But it was really fascinating because it was the first time I knew somebody was reading my work. Because back then everything was snail mail. And I got a few fan letters here and there, but you never knew. You know, Marvel would give me the Bill and Ted's letters and from kids, which was awesome. But you had no idea who was reading your stuff back then. Unless you did conventions, and I didn't do that many of them. So that was pretty wild. I mean, it fucked me up because, you know, when I realized people were reading my work, because I won an Eisner for the second Helping Bill story, and I think I won for Milk and Cheese that year. I got completely crazy and went nuts for the next 40 years because I first was like, oh shit, nobody's reading my work. And then I was like, oh yeah, people are reading my work. Oh fuck, people are reading my work. And I went nuts. I really did. Because I felt like everything had to be better than the last one, which is why the last two Eltingville stories are ridiculously detailed. I wanted to go out with a bang. But yeah, Mark Hamill, real quick, a bunch of us from Hanley's, we're out at San Diego, and Hamill was he was not, you know, they hadn't brought Star Wars back, but he was friends with some of the people that I knew from Dark Horse, who came from Kamiko. And I walk into the room, I mean, it's like 5 in the morning, and I'm drunk, because it's convention, and I walk in, Pete Dolan's drunk, and Pernicone, Jim Pernicone's trying to go to sleep. Mark Hamill, more orange than your shirt, sir, than our horrible president, the Nazi, he's standing there with lollipops, handing lollipops out to everybody. And we ended up talking for like 10 minutes. He was super cool, but I mean, the marijuana was coming out of him like it was Dagobah Swamp. It was fucking crazy. And he was just like,
Evan, do you remember you asked him if he had a Godzilla costume because you read about it in Famous Monsters?
I don't remember that at all.
Well, he said, I didn't have a costume, I had a foot.
I don't remember that. I only remember him asking me if he wanted a lollipop, and I kept saying no. And then years later, this was about 5 years, Heroes Con, running to Bob Schreck, I'm sitting there with Mike Oming and Tucky and Sarah and I said to Schreck, do you know anything about Mark Hamill getting lost at the what was that hotel? It was the, I can't remember. But I said, do you know the other half of this story? Because I don't know if I told you. I met Mark Hamill that night. He was in our room. He got lost. He ended up and he was so high, but it was awesome hanging out with him. And he said, oh yeah. And he filled me in on the whole thing. He went out to get ice. They were at a party. It was like Billy Mummy and that whole Dark Horse crowd. They were starting to do comics together and stuff. And Mark Hamill was there, and everybody apparently was smoking the drugs. And he went out to get ice, and they lost him for a while. They lost him for like an hour or something crazy like that. And eventually he made his way back. But I don't know, he didn't have an ice bucket when we saw him. He just had, I should have taken a lollipop. But that was really cool. I mean, that's the thing about those conventions. They were so small that you would just, bands, the members of the Cramps were like a few tables down from me, and I didn't have the guts to say hello. But you would hang out with, I got to meet Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez, and we became friendly. And we ended up working together. And I guess the other moment was when I did this book called World's Funnest for DC in 2000, because I got to work with David Mazzucchelli, Frank Miller, Alex Ross, Jaime Hernandez, Jim Woodring, Ty Templeton, Mike Allred, the guy who designed that, blanking on that, Sheldon Moldoff. Who else was in that?
Brian Boland.
Brian freaking Boland did the cover. Frank Cho was on there.
Did you say Alex Ross?
Yeah, I said Alex Ross.
Okay.
And that was amazing to be writing material for a lot of people, a lot of them who I was big fans of and wanted to get involved with the project. Dave Gibbons. Dave Gibbons freaking was the Iron Man. He did like 20 pages for that. That was a geek project and a lot of fun, and it just made me feel like the fact that these artists said yes to me meant a lot to me. Now they would not admit that they know me. They'd pass me by at a convention. They'd go looking for Mark Hamill like. Any other questions? Oh Jesus Christ! You sir. I'll try to answer these quick. Sorry.
As a writer, what do you prefer? Stories like manga that have a beginning or end, or stories like Spider-Man that can go on for years and years and years?
As a fan, I like both. Because I grew up, if they ended Spider-Man on me, what would I have done? you know? I've been crying all day and night. It would have been worse than when they killed Gwen, you know, which was still bullshit, but whatever. I like stuff that ends. That's why I do like that. I like the manga, you know, Eldingville ended. I mean, I had more stories, but I was sick of it, because working with those characters makes me want to throw things. And because I had to look up a lot of nasty fan behavior by the time, you know, I did the last few. And I like stuff that ends, and I like writing stuff that ends. I think that one of the greatest things about working for Marvel and DC is that you never have to write an ending. When do they write an ending to anything? You know, it's like, has Bendis written an ending to anything? Nothing against him, but it's like, it feels like when you do get to the 4th issue, to be continued in our freaking crossover series. I mean, I write endings. I have 8 pages, I'll write endings. All my stories have endings. I prefer that. I think that's nicer for the reader, it's nicer for me. And it's good to put your toys away and get new toys. Yes, sir.
So the Eltingville pilot.
Uh-oh.
Here comes these questions.
Can you give some insight as to like pitching it to a studio?
I
Like
didn't pitch
Adult
it. They came to me. Because look at me, man. Ooh. His shirt is 40 years. I'm so rich. No, that was because of Space Ghost. I have never pitched the show. I have never pitched it. I only started pitching comics in my 50s. I mean, it just, because I did so many weird things. I could write a superhero comic, I could do a 2-page Milk and Cheese strip. I could do, and there was opportunities. There was anthologies back then. There was free weeklies. My Milk and Cheese ran in the Onion for a bunch of years. They were reprints, but I mean, I could do Dorp pages I did a page for Esquire magazine, and I owned all of that, so I could bring it back into Dorp, to Milk and Cheese. So I got hired on Space Ghost Coast to Coast because of Milk and Cheese. Somebody gave the trade paperback to Mike Lazo, who ran the Adult Swim. The Adult Swim wasn't a thing then, but he ran the late night programming. And they weren't sure what they wanted Moltar and Zorak to the dialogue. They were still working it out. And he thought Milk and Cheese kind of sounded the banter. So he hired me to do a sample script. I ended up working on it with Sarah, my wife, Sarah Dyer. And we got hired, and we ended up working for a couple of years on about 14 episodes that got made. At the end of that, they asked me if I wanted to do a Milk and Cheese strip, Milk and Cheese show, and I didn't want to sell them. So they said, literally they said, well, how about Eltingville? And I was like, oh, I'll sell them. I would love to have a cartoon show, that would be fucking awesome. And that was it. That was it. In fact, I did another pilot, I won't get into it because I bombed it out because I went crazy. But we did a pilot called Tyrone's Inferno, which had Ward Willoughby, Jane, Dickey, and Ironjaw, and Sikowski, the guy with the eye patch in the comic store. We never got the name of him in the show, but he was a guy his accent changed every day or two. He'd be Irish. We couldn't get the voice actor to really do a good job on him. So actually, did I do the voice for him? Oh, I don't remember now. So he sounded Russian and Scottish. So I said, okay, how about he's got a problem. He changes he's got a lot of background, and a lot of people in his background. So we'll just, whatever he says, it'll be good. But we had them with this ancient monster that was dug out by some heavy metal kids out of a pit in New Jersey. And they put him up in a trailer, and this was just going to be a horror series starring all the characters that they owned from Eltingville. That I sort of pitched because I said, I'm sorry, Eltingville sucked. And Keith said, I wanted to do a lot of stuff with the other characters. And he said, I talked to Mike, why don't you pitch something for the other characters? I'm like, oh shit, okay. And I ruined that, but.
I'm sorry, we have to, guys, next
Do we?
panel is coming on.
Oh, well, you can ask me the questions at the table if you want. Is anybody leaving the show and has a question real quick? On the way out, I'll answer it. Yes, sir.
What would you consider your weakest story, like the weakest comic you've ever read?
Mad Dog. Mad Dog from Marvel.
You said that you took the keys and help you hang out.
It's a piece of shit. Mad Dog. I'm doing an interview with a comic magazine about it in a week. It stinks.
I never said. What are your thoughts on like the like
That's a loaded question. I should have asked that a lot earlier.
It was an early 2000s trope.
Like, because I follow a lot of like just.
I don't follow web comics. My kid follows a lot of Korean web comics and stuff, but I don't have time. There's too much stuff.
There is so much. I mean,
What I do is I go to go to the library and I take a bunch of books that were good to me. And it's free. And then if I like the book, I'll say, yeah, I was going to say, who's this? Was no, I don't want that. Yeah, I was going to say, I brought it because I knew that was somebody else's thing. Ronnie, turn that off. What the fuck?